Hello everyone and welcome back to another video from my channel, Hybrid Model Railway. Now today we are going to be talking about ballasting. This is just a quick pre-video notice to say that I do recommend watching this video in full, although if you aren't going to be ballasting soon, then you can skip through it using the YouTube timeline down below in the player. But if you are going to be ballasting anytime in the near future, then I do recommend actually watching the video in full, because that will give you every single bit of information you need to know to start ballasting, rather than just bits and bobs and then you might have been left with questions at the end. I have still got a bit of a cold, so if I sound a bit bunged up and I sound like I'm dying halfway through, then that's the reason why. So yes, indeed, today we're going to be talking about ballasting. It's going to be a complete guide to ballasting. It'll show you how to ballast points, how to ballast your track correctly, how to get the correct shoulder, and everything you would need to know in order to ballast your track. We're not going to be ballasting any of these lines today. We're going to be doing the second radius one, partially because it's got points on it and I can show you how to ballast points, but partially over because I don't want to be leaning over. I can do it here, stood up quite nicely. So we're doing the second radius line today, just this straight up and long down here. We're not going to be doing all this area because that's far too much work to squeeze into one video. There are three main parts to ballasting. Number one is pre-ballast. Number two is obviously just doing the ballasting, and number three is after ballast. I'm going to go through them three steps today to make sure that ballasting is as easy, simple and quick as you'd expect it to be, because as I've said before, ballasting is quite boring. It can be difficult, so I'm going to show you how to do it in an easy and simple way so that it doesn't become boring and you think, oh sod it, I can't be bothered, I'll leave it until next week. So we'll crack on with that. So then, the pre-ballast section, and that has three steps that you need to do. First of all, you need to make sure that your track is completely dust-free. There isn't any debris in the way, there isn't any random bits of stuff laying on the rails. Your rails do need to be relatively clean. You need to make sure your points work, which this one does, and the one at the other side that you couldn't see now or before. That one works as well, as you can hear. That one works, and obviously this one works. So we've got dust-free track. I hoovered this before we started and I've wiped it over and sweeped it a little bit as well. So that's the first step. You need to make sure you have dust-free track. And the second one is you make sure you have no debris in the way, which we don't here. And the third step is make sure your track is securely pinned, which obviously we know there is. This section down here is completely pinned. Make sure it's completely wired up so that trains run on it, and of course it does. You can see wires here. And there's another wire further along here. We know that it's wired up and trains running it perfectly fine because you've seen it in videos. Make sure that your points work. We've already tested that. And make sure that there are no holes that are going to let water or glue go through them. So we've got a hole over here, and further up the track we've got another hole on the other side. Obviously one hole for each wire that goes to each rail. So under this one I've got a piece of wood, and here is said piece of wood because I'm going to pump that hole full of hot glue to stop any water going through it. So I'm just going to make sure that that piece of wood is underneath that hole so that any glue drip through is going to go onto the piece of wood and not onto my cabinets. I did try doing this with electric tape and that failed because electric tape isn't very sticky, and I also tried doing it with regular sellotape on the station area that has already been ballasted, and that didn't go very well. It leaked all over the floor, the tape peeled off, and it isn't very water secure. So I'm going to try doing it with hot glue instead. So all I'm going to do is aim the nozzle down there, squeeze the trigger, and pump that hole full of hot glue. I can wipe the excess on the wood, it doesn't really matter, it'll come off easy enough anyway. Make sure that's not going to squirt any more out, so I will leave that to dry. So the glue is still a little bit tacky, but now I can bring in my chisel and just gently peel it off. Every tool that I'm going to show in today's video is pretty much necessary to ballast. You know, without a chisel, if you have to remove any excess ballast, it's going to be quite difficult. And also the tools that I'm going to show today, even if you haven't got them, such as a vacuum cleaner for removing excess ballast, and I'll demonstrate that later. Tools that you would use for ballast can also be used in different aspects of modelling. You don't just have to buy a 30 quid vacuum cleaner and just use it for ballasting. Obviously you can use it for dusting the loft out, especially if you're in a loft. So that's that hole glued up, I think. So I'll let you know if any problems arise with that. And now I'll just clean up the hole underneath of my piece of wood, which obviously you won't be able to see. And now I'm going to do the exact same with the other one. So the piece of wood again is underneath. Locate the hole, which is just there. Put the nozzle in and fill it full of hot glue. You don't really have to worry about it melting the sleepers. It doesn't get super hot. It gets quite hot, but not stupidly hot, so it won't melt your sleepers, and plus you're going to put grass and ballast next to it anyway, so for me, I'm not really that bothered. Plus the sleeper's already been partially melted when I soldered the wire underneath it. So now we let that dry. Okay, I think we're mostly dry now. Obviously don't let it fully harden, otherwise you'll spend more time chiseling it off. I'd recommend for both ballasting and removing excess bits of glue like this, just using a fairly blunt chisel. This isn't sharp enough that if, you know, I pull my finger across it, it's not going to cut me open and cause me to have to go to A&E. And obviously if you slip with it when you're removing ballast, then you don't want it to take a massive gash out your rails, which I have done once, despite it being quite a blunt chisel, but it's not made a difference to the track. It's just to put a little bit of a bevel on it. So that's the excess glue removed there. I will have a check underneath and I'll get back to you. Right then, so underneath was completely fine and we have completed our pre-ballast checks. So now it's time to start actually getting into the actual ballast. Now I'm sure at this point you are expecting me to pull out a ballast spreader, which I do have here. I'm going to say now, if you're using thick ballast like me, don't know if you can see, and then as you can see, I am not using fine ballast. I'm using quite chunky ballast, not only because it's cheaper, but because in my mind, when I think of ballast, I think of big lumps of rock, whereas some other people in different regions think it's quite fine. But I've gone for thicker stuff because it's cheaper, it's the right colour, and I think of ballast as big chunks of rock, but it just depends. Plus, this is £15 off eBay for 2 kilograms, whereas like Woodland Scenic's fine ballast is about that price of 273 grams, which is an odd measurement, and it's really, really expensive. And I thought, no, I'm not paying the same price for, you know, 10 times less. That's stupid. So I'm using the thick stuff. I'll explain why the ballast spreader doesn't work later. But first of all, we've got to prepare our gluing solution. So take something like a plastic bowl. Don't use your mum's best Pyrex jug like I did. So you're going to need PVA glue. So this was about £7 for a litre. A litre's fairly big. Just off Amazon. Just general, cheap PVA glue. You could use wood glue, but I think this does everything. It does, you know, sealing bricks and stuff like that. So you want a 50-50 mix of water and glue and a drop of washing up liquid. So I'm going to use a plastic bowl. If you use another one, then if you leave your glue in the bottom, then it'll stick to it. But luckily, if you leave glue in the bottom and it hardens with this, you can just peel it off and it gives you this satisfying creation at the bottom of that. So you want roughly 50-50. You don't have to measure it out exact like I did in a Pyrex measuring jug. So I'm actually going to unscrew the top because you might as well. So, and another thing that's good about this is you can actually use cling film to preserve it, so you're not wasting it. Or you could, even mix it in like a Tupperware thing, because that's plastic again. It's not going to stick to the bottom and completely ruin it. Another thing that's useful to have for these ballasting sessions is some sort of old towel to wipe up spills and clean off the top of your thing. Just another useful thing to have that you buy it and you've got it forever. So that's just covering about that far up the bowl. So now I'm going to go get some water and some washing up liquid, and I'll fill that up with just maybe a teaspoonful of washing up liquid in the glue, and I'll do it half as much as again water, so same water to glue ratio. So there's my glue mixture, 50% water, 50% bog standard PVA glue, and about a teaspoonful of washing up liquid. You can't see the washing up liquid, although it has gone slightly yellowy, but you can't tell because it's in a yellow bowl. So next thing to do is just mix it together. So you don't want any lumps of glue or pools of water in it. In fact, I've done far too much here, so I'll put cling film over it when I've finished. It does take quite a while to dry though. And that's why you have your towel, so you don't spill it all over the place. Thankfully the track on there is going to be getting wet anyway. So you just have to mix it together. Sometimes it can take a while, but just using a cheap plastic spoon is sometimes best. Right then, so that's nicely mixed in. It's not perfectly mixed in, there still are some lumps, but you just don't want it so lumpy that it'll block up your syringe. So I've actually done far too much over here. In fact, it's almost ridiculous how much I've done. So I am going to set that over there on the towel so that we don't have any incidents. Let's put that. That's on a massive lump there. That's going to work. Right, we'll put it there instead. Right, now I'm going to demonstrate here why with thicker ballast like this, the ballast spreader doesn't work. So, issue number one with this is it's expensive. It's 11 quid, but I thought, oh, it makes ballasting a lot easier. All you do is scoop up your stones, run it along, gives you a perfect ballast shoulder, flatten it down, and then glue, bam, you're done. No. With my ballast, and this ballast is maximum 3mm stones, and this is holes that are bigger than 3mm for both directions, it still clogs up. Another thing is this angled chute down the side. Stones actually end up getting trapped in here instead of coming out the bottom here, which is also an issue. And the slider gets blocked, so if you fill it while it's closed and try to open it, sometimes it won't open. If you fill it while it's open and then try to close it when you get to the end of the track, that also doesn't work. So I'll just demonstrate to you on this small bit here. So I'll open the shutter just to give it chance. In fact, we'll switch over to my secondary device, which is a jug, because this is how I'm going to do my method, not the traditional method. I'm actually just going to take out some of these stones that have been glued together. The surface of my jug has got quite a few stones that have been glued together and taken off, so I'll take those glued ones out. I think that's most of them. I shouldn't really put the glued stones back together in with the loose stones. That's not really giving it a fair chance. So this is my jug. So I'll pour the stones into the ballast spreader. This is how it should technically work. You open it, you put in your stones. There's a bit of foil that's ended up in there. I need to be more careful. So that's filled up there. I just have two containers because my ballast came in a bag, so I emptied it into this big one and then decant the big one into the small whenever I need it. So I open it, I run it along, and oh dear. So not only does it not leave a proper ballast shoulder, it's not even consistent, it leaves out the mix, and it does a terrible job. For 11 quid, it's not worth it. That bit of foil can stay there, look. Even if you run it backwards and forwards multiple times, it's useless. I mean, even if you like tap it up and down, it just doesn't work for my ballast. And it advertised, you know, my ballast is 3mm and the holes on this are much bigger than 3mm, and it leaves you with that. So for those of you who might be saying, oh, you're using old ballast, try it with the new stuff. Okay, I will use the new stuff. Here we go. The new stuff that hasn't been taken off before. If I do it with this stuff, it might work a bit better, but I think my method is going to be much quicker and cheaper. So look, with the new stuff, just slightly better. You get a bit of a shoulder on the side, but it deposits far too much in the middle, and it does a terrible job. I mean, what is that? I mean, it looks terrible. So I'm going to clean this up. So dustbuster. Get yourself a dustbuster on your model railway. I don't care if you don't use it for vacuuming up excess ballast, because you're not going to do it the ballast spreader way. Hopefully you're going to do it my way if you've got slightly bigger ballast than average, but still should have worked. But get yourself a dustbuster. It's good for vacuuming up excess bits of ballast once you've glued it down and getting the loose chippings off once you've removed it. And also it is very, very useful just for dusting in general. So I'm going to have to vacuum all this up now, and I'll get back to you and show you my method and how I'm going to do it in future. Right, I haven't been too meticulous with ballasting because it's all going to get ballasted in a moment anyway. I'll move that tripod out of the way. I keep whacking into that and it's probably going to break because it's only cheap. Anyway, that's not the point. So, my method, and in fact I'm going to put all of this old ballast back into here. And I'll mix it in together. This is all from the dustbuster, so obviously you can reuse this ballast. All the ballast has gone everywhere because it's too full. So you can just empty all your ballast out, and then just whack it straight back into there. It's a lot easier than sweeping it up and stuff like that. And, you know, you can use it for something else now. So I'm just going to mix all this together, just so the chiselled off stuff and the new stuff is relatively combined. It shouldn't make a difference, but, you know, just to give it the benefit of the doubt for video. So that's all mixed together. This ballast is also a little bit dusty. It's not super dusty. I think with the woodland scenic stuff, it's actually dustless. There's no dust whatsoever. I think this is just actual real ground up pebbles, but not bothered about a bit of dust. It doesn't go everywhere and you can just dust it off. So the main difference between my method and the ballast spreader method, which I've just demonstrated to you, is that when you apply the ballast by hand, which is what we're going to be doing, you have complete and utter control over where the ballast goes. With the ballast spreader, you know, it doesn't work, but if it did work, you know, it just runs along, and as you can see, the ballast is far too much in the middle of the track. So you can control where the ballast goes, how much of it there is, and how fast it gets put on. We're not going to do the point just for the moment. We're going to do just this little bit of track here. I'll get onto points in a minute. I'm not going to ballast the whole track on camera because that'll just take far too long. So we're going to lay the ballast. So I've only tested this method out briefly. So I'll just mix the ballast in here together. I've only briefly tested it out, and I'm going to get a bit further down for this. The idea of using a jug is that you can distribute the ballast wherever you want. So, if I can actually get some to come out. And there are all the rocky bits that have been glued together. Wonderful. So I'm going to just put my hand there just so I can get some of the rocky bits caught. Using the jug, you can... That's better. We've got all the rocky bits out now. Apologies. The idea of using the jug, now that we've got all the terrible bits of glued together ballast out, I really need to stop leaving it in big chunks. That's another top tip. The idea is when you use a jug, and I'll move the camera up. So the idea of using a jug is that you can control exactly where you want the ballast. So if I want a little bit in the middle here, I can just gently tap it, and I can ballast in the middle, whereas the ballast spreader just puts far too much on. So you can individually control pretty much how much goes in each sleeper. So I'm just gently tapping it along and moving it. And as you can see, there's much less ballast going on now than with the ballast spreader. We just move it along there. And you can see we've got to the point already. Much quicker than using the ballast spreader, nothing to respill. Now another thing about using the jug that you can do is that you can sweep your hand across it and sweep the thing in, whereas with the ballast spreader there is so much ballast going onto the track that you have to basically suck it all off and start again. So I'm going to distribute this out now. I can get a nice even covering between the sleepers without interfering with the running quality, because obviously you've got to leave room for your flanges on either side, and we'll get that in tomorrow when all this has dried. So as you can see there, if I get it all into the nooks and crannies, we've got a fairly nice ballast track, and obviously it's not completely covering the sleepers. I'll just dust a bit more over the top just so we can fill any of the gaps. This is another good thing, you can see where you want it, and you're not just doing it blind with a ballast spreader and doing it for you, so you can see where gaps need filling. You can just brush it gently over the top. You could use a paintbrush, but I prefer to use my fingers. You can fill up the gaps there. Got a bit of a gap down here, I can fill that up. Can move most of the excess off. You'll never get all of it off, which is why when we come to tomorrow, you'll see that some of it needs to be chiselled off in order to run properly. So, obviously you can see the wood, but if I'd have thought, I would have done like an undercoat of brown or grey, but I'm actually not that bothered because some of this thing is going to be static grassed over, which means that some of it will go in between, and when the whole layout is done, you won't really be able to tell it's wood. You'll just think, oh, there's something brown under there. It's not really a problem. So that's there. Need to brush that along there. And as you can see, we've got a fairly good amount of coverage there. Most of the rails, in fact, all of the sleepers, sorry, they don't have too much ballast on them. You can still see the sleepers, which is good. There isn't too much ballast above it, but we can gently brush that along and remove the excess. Just move it off to this side where we can vacuum it up later. And as you can see there, we've got a fairly nice inside ballast there. I think that looks pretty good. A lot quicker than doing it with a ballast spreader. Because with the ballast spreader, you sort of, you have to tap it, because it puts, when you bounce it up and down to actually get it to come out, puts so much of a shoulder there that it actually interferes with the running rails, and that's what I did over there in the station area. I used the ballast spreader, and it puts so much ballast on that the actual flanges whack on the shoulder that's here, so that's why with the second radius line I've had to chisel a load off, and with the third and fourth they are needing to be chiselled off. And also, if you've got a platform with the ballast spreader, all the ballast gets put down an equal length either side, whereas if you do it with the jug, you can control, if you do it separately, how much ballast. So I wouldn't have had to chisel all that off if I'd have realised that the ballast spreader is actually just a piece of junk in my case, and I'd have been able to use it properly. Have a go at doing the actual shoulder itself. So, ballast shoulder is basically the same process as doing the middle of the track. You just tap your jug along to get an even strip along each side. Don't need too much on. I just find this method so much easier than using the spreader. We're going to stop there, and then all you have to do is just gently push it down just from the rails, and then cover any little bits up that are in the way. Like that. And then that's basically your ballast shoulder. Pat it down a little bit, and you can see that's your ballast shoulder. You've got your little bits up here, and you can see where it goes up there. Same with the other side. There's no platform going to be in this area, so I don't need one side to be less covered than the other. Again, use your jug. In fact, that's far too much there, but that doesn't matter. You can use your jug, get the right amount of ballast you want. And of course, you don't just have to stop at one bit. I'm only doing one bit because I'm on camera. Well, you can, do the whole length, and you don't have to keep refilling the ballast spreader and shutting its badly designed shutter. I mean, I'm not saying it's unusable, but just for my purpose, even though it was supposed to work, it doesn't. Pat it down nicely. Fill any gaps. It's like cooking. Fill the gaps with some oregano. Drizzle the olive oil from a height. That's Jamie Oliver. From a height, 3 kilometres up in the air. Sorry, Jamie. I doubt you're watching this, though. And then you just fill the gaps, gently pat it down, And then I think that is a pretty good ballast shoulder, if you ask me. So as you can see there, with this simple method, instead of using that ballast spreader, which costs 11 quid and for my purpose doesn't actually work, you've actually got a nice bit of ballast in there. A quick vacuum. And if you ask me, that looks pretty good. We're now pretty much ready to glue that. But first, I shall do the rest of this straight. Right then everyone, I've done the whole area. How long do you think it took? 10 minutes? 20 minutes? Half an hour? No. That took me 8 minutes to do that entire stretch, including laying the ballast out with the jug, including flattening it down to make it look nice, including, you know, even doing a little bit of vacuuming, but I haven't done that much. Whereas with this thing, which I've now just thrown off the back of the baseboard, it took me almost half an hour to get the entire track looking like this. With, where was the jug method? 8 minutes. Unbelievable. Obviously, haven't done both the points, but I shall show you how to do them right now. So then, ballasting points is pretty much exactly the same as ballasting straight track, except you've got to be a little bit careful. So you've got to be careful that you don't get any stones caught behind the pickup, well, not the pickup wipers, the switchers here. Your point needs to be able to move freely, and at the moment it can't, so you can just use a small screwdriver to dislodge any small stones, and as you can see it works fine. You don't want to glue up the tie bar or the place where you flick the point, otherwise you will have to force it open, because if you glue it shut, then yes, you can rectify it just by putting some water on it to dissolve the PVA, or you can just try and force it open. Now really you don't want any stones behind here whatsoever. You might be able to see there's a little one behind there, but it doesn't stop the point from functioning. Now you don't want to put any more ballast in after this slot. Obviously that's a little tiny gap there. You want to be very careful when you apply ballast here, and make sure that you don't go too far or too heavy handed with the ballast here. You need to make sure your point still opens. You don't want any stones behind this area or any stones behind that area. Then the only place where you really want to put very, very light amounts of stones or ballast is sort of just in the middle there, so you don't really want to go, at least in bulk, any further than sort of that sleeper there. You can see there's a gap there, but what you can do is you can individually stick stones down, either with super glue or with just a little small dab of PVA. This is the sort of like the bulk ballasting, but the detail ballasting, you just got to be very careful with where you put your stones, and as you can see there, to demonstrate, I've gone too far. So you don't want to go really any further than there, because otherwise, once you start spraying your water to get it to stick, stones get stuck behind it, and then you've got to chisel them out when the glue's absolutely rock hard. So you don't want to go any further than that. Flick your point a few times to make sure the ballast is dislodged. Take some out if you need to. Add a little bit of fine stuff, sweep any excess out, move that bit along there, and just make sure that your point works. Obviously there is still quite a lot of wood visible there, but you can just stick individual stones down, which I will start doing with all my other points when the time comes. Other than that, the other things to watch out for is that you don't get any stones trapped behind here. You don't get any stones stuck on top of this plastic bit or behind this metal bit here. And also you don't want any stones wedged behind this plastic bit here. You need the gap in there. So again, it's been very gentle. Don't use the jug this time. Just use your hands and just very gently sprinkle on the ballast, distribute it. As you can see there, we've got a stone on the top. You just want to move that out of the way, move it further back down the line. Some in there, some around there, some down there. And I'd say don't go any further than the join there, because that's where the rail pivots. Don't go any further than that, or you do risk gluing up your rail. So you can see it from where it pivots. Don't go any further than that with bulk ballasting. Maybe you want to find some really fine ballast and go behind it and stick the individual stones down. But when you're doing bulk ballasting like this, don't worry about anything like that. Just get as close as that join and no further. And I did go further. Does that point still work? Yeah, that's completely fine. Make sure it snaps over and all that. And that is pretty much that point, or that section of the point ballasted. Up at the top, I'm only going to go to this rail because this is one point and then that's the start of the other point. So I'll do the other point when I do the other rail. Again, don't get any stones stuck behind that plastic bit. You're not going to have a good time if that happens. So just work your way down. Make sure it's nice and flat. And don't get any stones further on than that sort of sleeper there. So I'll move that a bit further up. And that, I think, is that point ballasted. The switch still works, it's not getting jammed up. All that's left to do now is do exactly what you've done on the straight and put the ballast on here. Is to put the ballast on there, and with the tie bar you want to leave a little U round it. I'm not sure if it's the tie bar, but I'm just going to call it the tie bar. You want to leave a little U-shaped thing round it, so sort of like that. So you want to form a little U round it, and then once the bulk ballast has dried, again you can stick individual stones there to cover up the other areas that haven't been ballasted. So form a little U round it like that. On both sides, I've just dipped my hand in the glue, not in the bucket of ballast. What an idiot. Good job I've got that towel there, haven't I? Just form a little U round it. Cover up any excess. Doesn't have to be a high barriered U, just a couple of stones like that, as you can see. Get rid of those two that have crept in there. Just a tiny little bit. And small screwdrivers like this are really useful for just itching the stones back and forth. So as you can see there, if we glue them stones there, the stones aren't going to glue themselves to that. And then you can get your really fine stuff or your static grass and just gently work your way around it. It's really just a process of being careful and doing it as best as you can the first time, and then removing little bits of ballast or adding little bits of ballast as is needed. So we'll flatten that out now just by using my hand, and this is how I flatten it out. I put it on with the jug and then just flatten it out to make sure there's going to be no interference, and sometimes just gentle sweeping motions to make sure the flanges don't get stuck or anything like that. Not the flange, the outside of the wheel. Same thing. Well, it's not the same thing actually, George. And then, same up here. Just go down. Stop about there. Little U of stones round. Add a little bit more there. I am going to vacuum most of this away when I come to stick it down. I appreciate this has been a long video, but it is an in-depth tutorial, and if I don't give you an in-depth tutorial, then I won't have answered all your questions, which is pointless doing a video about if I don't do that. So I'll just flatten that out a little bit, replace any excess. Not replace any excess, put some more on if needed, flatten it out, small screwdriver, make that little U round the point bar, extend it in that direction, so you know the boundary. Make a little U like that. Like so. And we're pretty much good to go with that point there. I shall go and do the other one, and then I'll show you the sticking process. Also, if any of you are wondering, that's what I've done for that middle triangle. Just again, carefully filled it with stones and make sure it's not going to interfere with any of the wheels. Okay, so I've done some vacuuming, I've removed the excess stray bits of ballast, and I don't know about you, but I think that looks pretty good. Now, despite what you may think, gluing ballast is actually very, very easy. The only things you need are your glue and your water mixture from earlier, a pipette syringe or like baby medicine thing that you like squirt into the mouth to give them medicine thing to dispense your glue, and you need a bottle. You need like a squirty bottle like this one. This is stuff you'd find in like Cif or Flash squirty cleaner or kitchen worktop degreaser or whatever. All you need to fill in here is water with, again, about a teaspoon or two of washing up liquid, just to break the surface tension, and I'm not going to explain that, but basically it just helps the water and the glue seep in between the stones. So if you're doing half a bottle, I'd say water and 1 teaspoon. If you're doing a full bottle, I'd say water and 2 teaspoons of washing up liquid. All you do with the washing up liquid, I'll turn the nozzle to on, because I turn it off because otherwise I end up spraying it everywhere. All you want to do is very carefully, as not to disturb your stones. You want it quite soaked, but not very soaked. All you want to do is wet your stones. Don't worry about your rails. You can clean off any water residue or glue residue with a track rubber afterwards, or your chosen method of cleaning. All you want to do is a nice wet coating of your washing up liquid and water, or I should say water with washing up liquid, not the other way around, because that wouldn't be very good. You'd be cleaning your track, but in a completely wrong way. Anyway, so we've got glue and water mixture here off camera. Mix that up again. Consistency in there's not too bad. I get my syringe. Well, it's not really a syringe, it's a medicine dispenser. Fill that up, and then liberally, but not too liberally, liberally, you want to glue it. You want to put a nice coating of glue and water on, but not so much that you know it's really glued. You just want an even coating. So dribble that glue mixture onto your ballast. You want maybe a drop as you go along, so like a drop and then another drop next to another drop. And as you can see there, it's started to seep. So I'd suggest going down the middle with your glue. And then after you've gone down the middle with your glue, I'd suggest move towards the edge and start dribbling it over the edge like this. You want your edge ones to be glued down, and then after you've done the edge, I'd suggest go to as close as the rails as you dare, but if you get glue on your rails, it doesn't really matter, you can just clean it off with a track rubber. And as you can see, hopefully there, the mixture hasn't just stayed in the blob where I put it, it's dispersed everywhere and moved around and about. So that's basically it. Spray it with your water and your washing up liquid, then add your glue, water and washing up liquid along like that, and if you've done it correctly, you should see after a little while it starts to disperse evenly and doesn't just stay in a massive blob. And in the middle of your rails, you don't really need to do edges and then the middle, just blob it in the middle and it disperses perfectly fine. So that's how you do the straights. I shall show you how to do a point now. Here we are at the point. I have dimmed the exposure on these shots just so you can see everything a bit clearer. You want your bottle of water. Again, doesn't matter about getting even the tie bar wet on this one. You want a nice coating of water everywhere. Don't worry about it rusting. It's nickel silver track. It doesn't rust, thankfully. Otherwise, we'd all have a job on cleaning it. Just want a nice coating of water. Not too wet, not too dry. It's better to have it too wet than too dry. And then, same process as with the straight track, you've just got to be very, very, very careful about where you dribble your water. So I'd suggest doing the outside first. So dribble your water here, and then go around your U-shape. Stay on the outside of your U-shape, not the inside of your U-shape. Because if you go on the inside of the U-shape around the tie bar, then what will happen is your glue will on the inside, it'll run towards the tie bar and potentially glue it to the board, rather than going on the outside, running down to glue the stones together but not going any further than that. So always glue on the outside of the little circles you make to avoid gluing your tie bar to the board, which is not a good thing, and then you have the risk of trying to unglue it and not ripping it in half. So carefully around the outside of your tie bar like that, along the sides as usual. In fact, if you push a bit harder, you don't have to do middle out and out. And then be very careful, but come down here, don't get glue behind those two plastic bits, go straight in the middle, tiny little blobs, tiny little blob, and then when you get to here, don't go any further than that, or you risk gluing the rail to the stones. Do not go any further than what I've just showed you there. Final checks on your points. Those two stones would have caused issues if I hadn't have noticed that, but thankfully I did. And then don't glue any further forward than this point here. Don't glue any further forward than there, and don't glue any closer than here. At this point here, you want very, very small blobs of glue. And I'm not going to go any further into that crevice than there. And then over here, again, you can blob a bit harder. When you get to this plastic bit, just go a little bit slower. And then when you get down here, you want very small drops. And I'm not going to go any further than there, because that's where it starts to, where the switch starts. So that's how to glue it down. So I shall glue the rest of this straight, and I'll come back to you tomorrow and show you how to tidy it up a bit. So see you tomorrow. Right then everyone, we are back. Actually, 2 days later. 2 days later, this little section now has been filmed rather than 1 day later. I just thought I'd give it, with the weather being colder now, I've started shutting the loft hatch as well, instead of leaving it down. Now it's coming into winter, to prevent the condensation problems we've had and to stop it happening. Nothing came of that, by the way. But I thought I'd leave it 2 days as a result of the lowered ventilation. And also it's getting a lot cold, so I've left it 2 days. And as you can see, as I'm sweeping my hand across, you might be thinking, oh, half of your stones aren't stuck down. But no, if you carefully look here, when I brush in the middle, that's where the stones are coming up. But if I brush on the side, hardly any stones come up. It's only right at the edge, the very excess stones at the edge that come off, and it's only the stones in the middle that come off that aren't between the sleepers. And that's good, because we want a nice shoulder. We don't want it too high, because I've had problems with that before. But I'm actually quite surprised at how good this looks. I've just done a brief bit of sweeping off camera just with my fingers, and you know, with the third and fourth radius lines over there, the sleep on top of the sleepers here was just completely and utterly gunked up with stone. But I think I'm going to have a bit of a vacuum now, and I shall get back to you on that. And then I will show you the basic and very brief method to just clean up the ballast after you've ballasted and make sure it all works properly. Right then, that is the vacuuming finished with. My dust buster is running out of battery, so I shall plug that on charge and leave it. Now, as you can see, that's looking a lot tidier now, and as you might have noticed, we have got some scenery, and in fact, even that little bit on the end there is scenery. If I get the control to the right setting, you see we've got a light up buffer stop. I won't tell you the story of the ballasting. There's no, not the ballasting. I won't tell you the story of why I've got all this scenery. I'll save that for Sunday's video, because unfortunately I am going away for the weekend with family this weekend, so unfortunately for the third week in a row there won't be a Sunday stream, but I will record a quick little layout update talking about this scenery and why it's all here, and I'll post that for Sunday instead of doing the stream, because I feel like 2 weeks in a row is meh, but 3 weeks in a row is just no, I'm not going to let that happen. So I'll record a video on the scenery and post that on Sunday for you. So anyway, I've got a train set up in the siding. I'll just make sure these points are shut. I'll get the right controller, that's another thing, and we'll just see how it runs. I'm not expecting it to run super well, because the ballast hasn't been cleaned up, and in fact I think the wheels need cleaning. Just make sure it's on. It is on. But as you can see, actually runs okay. Now, it's a little bit jittery, as you can see, and the rails are quite dirty with all the glue and water that's been splashed on. But you can see that it does run moderately fine, whereas when I've used the ballast spreader on the 3rd and 4th and 2nd radius tracks over on that side, it really hasn't worked that well. It's been, you know, derailing even after I've vacked, and it's really not worked very well. So the final stage, just to make sure it runs absolutely perfectly, is to check your points. So make sure there's no stones clogging up your points, or is in any of the locations that I said you shouldn't have stones in. So I can see a few have managed to sneak their way in that point. Make sure that your stones aren't like pressed against the side of your rails, because if they're pressed aside, if your stones are like glued like this one here right against the side of your rails, then what that will mean is your flange will be hitting those stones and causing the loco to bounce up and down like that. So you can use a screwdriver like I've got and just, you know, piggle at it and get any stones that are really close to the rails. So there's one there, that's going to be causing flange bashing, I shall just nickname that. So you just want to make sure that there's no stones pressed right up against the inside of your rails. Make sure that your locos aren't going to be bashing into them. And also, if you've got any stones that have managed to build themselves up to be higher than the running level of the rails, then also using a chisel might be quite useful like that. Just a small chisel like this one I showed earlier, just for running along the inside of the rails and getting the stones out of the way, can be a lot quicker than using a little screwdriver. So just make sure you don't dig into your sleepers though. Just clearing off the surface, be careful of your points. And just, you know, just getting into those stones that have found themselves towards the inside of the rails, which is actually much less than I thought it would be. So that's that side done. Not, as you can see, there's really not that many stones to actually remove. Most of the stones are either just loose anyway, or they just require a little bit of after cleaning for it to work. So just take your time, don't go too fast. With the 3rd and 4th, and with the 2nd, 3rd and 4th radius lines on that side, you know, I was spending 3 times as long removing excess ballast because of that silly ballast spreader. I was spending 3 times as long removing ballast than I was actually depositing ballast, when it should really be the other way around. You should be spending longer ballasting than you should be removing ballast, because after then you're just making backwards progress, aren't you? So don't worry if any stones come out in an area that you don't want to come out. You can always glue them down individually like I talked about earlier. So just go along and check. Of course you can get to the end of that bit of rail and get your eye down to it and have a check. Of course, the ballasting on straight sections with the jug method that I've showed you today, of course it works for curved sections as well. Just make sure you get the ballast shoulder right. No, not too many gaps in the centre, and make sure that your ballast height is less than the height of your rail. So I'll just get down and have a look. That's looking pretty good to me. Points still work, this one. That end you can hear that works, but you can't see. And then this one. There's a stone got caught behind one. That's also an important thing to check. Make sure there are no loose stones after removing all this, that your point still works. And hopefully you can see there that that one works fine. Of course, make sure stones don't gum up that little tie bar area, which those have, but they've been removed now. So that one works. That's got clogged up with a stone in there. Be very careful. Otherwise things will and can get clogged up. Where's that gone? And if a stone does find its way in there, then just be very careful not to snap the spring of the stone. Just make sure that you can get it out. and I've got it out there. So just be careful when you're sorting your points, because otherwise it can cause you problems. So after you've chiselled away your excess ballast, so I suggest when you've done your ballasting, do an initial vacuum to get rid of the excess stuff. Do your little bit of chiselling and then vacuum it off after each chiselling stage. And if you find you need to chisel some more off in an area, then of course chisel some more of it off. But I'm now going to do a secondary vacuum after that chiselling, and then we'll get on to the third stage of after ballasting. So there we are, a secondary vacuum done. That vacuum cleaner's getting quite full now. So the next thing to do after you've ballasted is to clean the track with a track rubber, or your preferred method of cleaning. I prefer track rubbers. I'm not going to explain why, because Trams Trains has made a perfectly good video on that recently. The next step is just to go along and gently clean your rails. Obviously now you've ballasted, some ballast might get in the way, and it might not, you know, you might not rub as smoothly with it as you might have done before. But in general, just make sure your track is clean. Go along with it with a track rubber. Just make sure it's as clean as you can get it. Don't need to scrub really hard. Just a little bit up and down works fine. And this is just to get off any dried water and washing up liquid spray residue, or any glue and PVA residue. Should just come straight off with the rubber. And because it is slightly abrasive, it will take it off. Obviously, it's not like you're using 80 grit sandpaper on your rails. God forbid what it'd look like if you did that. But as you can see, it's looking okay. And as you carry on, you know, tinkering with your little ballasted areas, eventually there will become a point where no more stones come off. But obviously there is always the chance that, you know, you will knock it and some stones will come off. You will never get all the loose stones up. They will almost certainly end up on the floor, which they have done more often, which is why I'm wearing slippers, because otherwise I get really irritated when all the stones go under my feet. Anyway, so that's the third stage. The fourth stage is basically what we've already done. Make sure it's all stuck down and re-stick some individual stones in the areas. So eventually, when I come to do my static grass, I will stick some individual stones in the places where you can see the wood. Touch up around the point work area and stuff like that. But after that, basically, it's just run your test train again and see if it works any better. And if not, you just tinker with it. Just tinker with it until it works fine. All you have to do is just keep removing bits until you're happy with how it runs. But I think that runs pretty smooth. Let's do it again at a bit faster speed. Now I think that's pretty smooth. Still a couple of areas which might need a little bit of work, such as this area here. Don't know how I missed all that. But this basically is just a process of ballasting. You just keep running different trains, run different lengths of trains, run different type of trains, use steam, diesels, old engines, new engines. Especially running your triang engines over it can be good, because they've got thicker wheels, so if you've got any ballast that's higher than the track, your wheels will hit that, and it'll let you know that some areas might need a bit of work. So let's just clean that area up a bit, and then it's just basically just tinkering until you're completely happy with how it works. So I'm happy with how the 9F goes over it. Obviously I can't get it perfect on camera because it requires me to get my head a bit closer down to the track and completely make sure it's working. Let's try the Triumph Flying Scotsman. I'm not sure how well this is going to work, with I've literally only just spent this time on video cleaning it up. This one probably won't go as smooth. It does still need some work, as I say. Let's stick the control on full wave. As you can see, it's a bit lumpier. It still needs a little bit of work. However, for the 10 minutes I've spent cleaning it up, it's not too bad. Obviously, it still is a little bit lumpy. It does need some work, but with ballasting, that's all you've got to do. Spend a little bit of time on it and you'll get it running nice and smooth. You see, it stops there. But basically, all you've got to do is just spend a little bit of time cleaning it up, keep running different trains over it: steam, diesel, old, new, fast, slow, long, short, passengers, wagons. Yeah, just keep doing that until you can get it to work. So I think that is pretty much it for our ballasting video today. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope it has been useful for you, and I hope I've been able to give you some tips and tricks on how to ballast and how I do it, so the way I've started to do it. And honestly, this has been the first way I've actually, you know, I have tested it a little bit before, but I've never actually glued it down or done any of the after process, you know. I've just sort of put some ballast on the track thinking, oh yeah, that might work. Well, this is actually the first proper go I've had at doing this method, and I have to say I'm pretty surprised. I'm happy with how the trains run already. Yes, the Trying Flying Scotsman is a little bit rough, but it's certainly not as rough as it was when I first tested it on those lines behind me. So I think this will help make the ballasting process for me and for you a lot quicker. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope I've been able to give you some tips and tricks, and hopefully maybe even change your mind about how you ballast. So hope that's been useful for you, and I will actually see you obviously in the Thursday and Friday YouTube shorts, but the next main video will actually be on Sunday to make up for the fact that I am not here to do a normal Sunday live stream. So yes, feels weird to say this, but I will see you on Sunday for another main video instead of the live stream. Do hope you enjoyed. That's just going to be a brief talk about the scenery on this side. Obviously you haven't seen any of the scenery anywhere else, but I shall leave you in suspense until, well, you will most likely see some of it in Thursday and Friday YouTube shorts, but I'll actually fully explain it in the Sunday video, sorry. Nearly said Sunday live stream. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.